So welcome to my reading wrap up. It's pretty sparse considering all of the grandiose plans that I had for it at one point, but I started my job recently, so that's really taken up all of my time. Plus the time before I started my job, I was just doing like every errand under the sun, like any errand that I'd ever had. I was just trying to accomplish that before I didn't have time anymore because the job would start soon. That also took loads of time away from me. And before that it was Christmas, so I just really let the reading go. I really hope that's not the pattern for the rest of this year, just because I have a lot of things I want to read and I really want to get to them, so we'll see how that goes. But this is everything that I've read in the last 3 or so months. Winter by reading 4 of the Frog and Toad books. I felt like I should read them at the end of autumn, but I never got around to that. But once I have it in my mind what my next read should be, I'm gonna be pretty insufferable until I actually finish it. So I finished the book that I wanted to read, and then I read a couple more of the Frog and Toad. And if you've never read them, they're children's stories that are really homely and sweet about a frog and a toad that are best friends. And it's basically about all of the cute and domestic activities that they get up to together. They're like low-key gay, but they're not. And it's very in line with the love for cozy fiction that's come about recently. And all the books are illustrated and they all have this very mid-20th century illustration style that you would see in children's fiction, which I think is very expressive and rich and like quite beautiful. And I think they really help to elevate these stories. The pictures, I think, are what really draw people into these books. So I really enjoyed reading them, even if they're quite short and for children, especially since I started reading Wind in the Willows. I've talked about this before, thinking that it was Frog and Toad. And when I was greeted by something absolutely insane, I was so thrown. And so it was really nice to actually get round to reading Frog and Toad. I was in a classic children's characters mood, so I also read some of the Peanuts comics. I specifically picked some of the Christmas ones to try and soak up the Christmas mood at the time, since I really wasn't feeling Christmas last year. And I wanted to watch A Charlie Brown Christmas, since that's quite a popular American children's Christmas cartoon. And I've seen it referenced, but I've never seen it myself. And so I thought I'd read some of the books that are vaguely associated with that movie. Our Christmas cartoons are things like The Gruffalo or The Snowman, so it was very interesting to see what Americanisms are in the Peanuts. The comics, I think, were decently funny, very tongue-in-cheek for a children's book, but I think that's meant to be the main appeal of them. I don't like the art as much as something like Frog and Toad, but I do really like Snoopy. There is this one TikTok account that makes Snoopy edits, and they're literally called Snoopy edits or something, and they're amazing. So it was really nice to watch or read something that had Snoopy in it, because I wanted to see what the character of Snoopy actually was like, and he really wasn't what I was expecting. I thought he'd be a really sort of reserved, nice little dog character, something aligned with Winnie the Pooh, but he's actually very sassy. I wasn't expecting that, and honestly, that was the funniest part of all the books for me. So I went to see Hamnet in the West End at the beginning of January, and I thought I'd go back to my roots and read the book before I watched the adaptation. And I didn't mean to, but I didn't end up reading the end of the book before watching the play. And because of this, I didn't really know the ending, which made a very interesting experience for me, as there were lots of parts where I could actively see the differences or the similarities of the adaptation process, but I couldn't really gauge the ending, which was fascinating when getting home to finish the ending eventually. But I thought the play was actually really good. So the stage directions or whatever was happening on stage was very cool. They made a lot of interesting staging choices to help the book come to life. However, I do still think the book is way better. I said this in another video recently, but again, Maggie O'Farrell's writing is very engaging and accessible. It's a sort of crowd-pleasing affair. It puts her in cahoots with Madeline Miller and Taylor Jenkins Reid as a popular women's fiction writer who writes retellings or imaginations of famous figures. Obviously, Taylor Jenkins Reid's are obviously a bit more, you know, fake and speculative without their own backstories, which is unlike, you know, Miller's Greek myths or Farrell's historical pulls. But overall, it makes her part of this very popular sect of women's fiction that write these like sort of referential stories with incredibly compelling qualities to them. And it's not just me thinking that I'm, you know, lumping in these women's writers together, because writers like Sally Rooney or Tessa Moshfegh or Eliza Clark don't write these, but it shows an increasing interest in this very particular niche for readers who perhaps, I think, don't want a slow-paced, introspective novel, right? This novel has more elegance than the usual gripping novels, since it's like very well paced, with excellent structure and a varied cast of characters, which I don't think is what's normally in like a mystery or a romance novel that I've seen as like these gripping kind of tale. The main character being an off-kilter version of Shakespeare's wife was not what I foresaw when going into this. I thought, you know, it was a book about his son, but it was a pleasant surprise. And the book flips between the present and the past, which I think gives this book much more intrigue than perhaps you would expect, because the audience obviously knows who Shakespeare is to the world before our characters do, even though this is actually following a different character. Like, we're following the mum before we're following the son or Shakespeare at all. I was so impressed by Hamnet that I immediately started on The Marriage Portrait. I enjoyed this book, but I think Hamnet definitely has it beat. The novel is about the Duchess of Ferrara, and the story is taken from the poem My Last Duchess, and that's also making it about the Medicis of Florence. The story flits between the past and the present, which helps the pace of this flow quite well, though I don't think the story is actually that strong. So the main character is well developed, so the Duchess, and her interior is, you know, laid out quite comprehensively, but the main villain, who is the protagonist of the poem, and her husband, is quite sparse. This is done, I think, on purpose because of the mystery in the story, but this part really falls flat since the mystery is not kept for very long. We don't feel anything towards him, and this means that any plot point moved forward by one of his actions instead of the Duchess just feels really hollow, and it's definitely still, you know, a very easy and free-flowing read. I just don't think it's as well crafted because all the characters don't have the same level of development to them, and especially in contrast to Hamnet, where that is the truth. Next, I wanted to read something about Palestine and the history of it, and I remembered my old graphic global narratives professor recommending Notes on Gaza and Palestine by Joe Sacco, so I thought I would check those out. We read Paying the Land in class. I remember thinking that was quite interesting to read journalism in a graphic format. Therefore, I was more drawn to this than perhaps like a more straightforward historical text. And I read Palestine first since it came out first. So the book is a collection of short pieces released in an old magazine, and it follows Joe Sacco doing some investigative interviews throughout Palestine in the late 80s. It's incredibly insightful, plus it's a very raw look into the apartheid system in place in Palestine, such as the brutalistic way in which Israel has squashed Palestinians into such a small space and how that has enabled Israel to take their liberties from them, which is a discussion that is in full display within this book with Palestinian voices. And the fact that it's, you know, around the 1980s kind of made me feel really sick that it's still like that there. It's worse right now, and it's incredibly inhumane. So I highly recommend reading this if you don't want a very straightforward or perhaps dense text about Palestine, but you still want to see what was happening there and what is happening there. I made a whole video talking about my feelings on lapvona, so please go watch that if you would like to hear my thoughts in detail. I'm not sure how much of this book has stuck with me since I first read it. It was a consuming read nonetheless, however, and it was entertaining and really original. And additionally, with some distance between me right now and the book and when I read it, I'm excited to read another one, because I think at the end of that I was like, oh, but now I think I'm ready. Bit of a side note, I guess. I went through all of the comics and the webtoons that I read. I talk about all of them in this old video, so I won't get into too much detail, but I basically did the same thing as I did in that video, where I read like 15 issues of each one all at once. I haven't read any issues since that video, so in September. I read them all in one day. Spending my whole day getting through these stories is more fun to me, like just committing a whole day to absorbing the stories than waiting, you know, week by week, since they pretty much always end on a cliffhanger. I don't love having to go through that every week. Once again, my favourite remains the kiss bet. I think it does everything I want it to do, plus it never turns to miscommunication to create lots of angst. And instead, even, it uses that miscommunication to be suspenseful or funny, which I really love, okay? Because I hate miscommunication. I think it's such an overused trope that in this, right, is both subverted and employed really skillfully to create a really good story. The last thing that I got round to starting is Breasts and Eggs by Miyako Kawakami. This is a story about 3 women in a family and them being aware of the fact that they are living as women in Japan, which is honestly kind of like a weird way of phrasing that, but it is the truth. I haven't actually finished this, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but I spent most of February trying to, so I just feel like I should discuss it a little bit. it's probably going to be the first book I have in my spring wrap up in the beginning of June or whatever. And yeah, I really like this book. The novel talks about wealth and gender mainly, which is discussed in much, much detail. And whilst I haven't finished the book yet, I was really gagged by when this book turns like sharply into absurdity. But considering that was a big part of Heaven, which I read last year, it's another book by this author, I don't know why I was so taken aback. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it and I am excited to finish it, especially since there's going to be a time jump, I think, soon. That was my wrap up of everything that I read in the last 3 months for all of winter. It's not a lot actually, now that I think about it. When I think about like the last one that I made, I think I made one in autumn. I read like 40 books or something. It was just like ridiculous. Maybe 30, I think 40 is a bit excessive. But like, this is kind of low. I'm hoping to read a little bit more, be a bit more assertive, but I really can't get myself to read on my commute. That's what I thought I was gonna do. I was gonna be like, yep, I'm gonna read on all the commutes. I'm gonna be 30 minutes of reading when I'm going into work, 30 minutes of reading when I come back from work. And I'm just like, I cannot be asked to do that while I'm like packed in like a sardine with all these other people on the tube. So yeah, just, we'll get to it. We'll get to reading, I promise. I will. This is myself. I'm not promising to anybody watching. I'm promising to myself, who probably is also watching when I edit this. But yeah, just wow. I need to commit to reading a little bit more. But yeah, thank you for watching. Tell me if you've read any of these or what you're planning on reading next. You can watch my autumn wrap up here, or you can watch my winter TBR to see just exactly how much I failed my TBR. So yeah, that's what I have for this video. Subscribe if you liked it, like the video if you liked the video, I guess. Why else would you like the video? And thank you for watching. Have a great day and take care of yourself.